meninges and neural venous signs. The meninges consist of three layers: dura mater, arachnoid, and pia mater. We start to describe the dura mater. The dura mater is a thick mesothelial membrane covering the brain and the spinal cord. It consists of two parts or two layers. The endosteal layer that is firmly adhered to the endosteum of the skull, and the meningeal layer proper. This is the meningeal layer proper, which consists of strong fibrous membrane. This is the meningeal layer. The dura is reflected between the periosteum and the dura proper, dura mater proper. The function of forming a septa, the function of this septa is to restrict the displacement of the brain when the head is moving from one side to another. We start to describe the first dural reflection, which is the falx cerebri. Falx cerebri. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Our laboratory session today is about the meninges and the dural venous sinuses. The meninges consist of three layers: dura mater, arachnoid, and pia mater. We start to describe the dura mater. The dura mater is a thick mesothelial membrane covering the brain and the spinal cord. It consists of two parts or two layers. The endosteal layer that is firmly adhered to the endosteum of the skull, and the meningeal layer proper. This is the meningeal layer proper, which consists of strong fibrous membrane. This is the meningeal layer. The dura is reflected between the periosteum and the dura proper, dura mater proper. The function of forming a septa, the function of this septa is to restrict the displacement of the brain when the head is moving from one side to another. We start to describe the first dural reflection, which is the falx cerebri. Falx cerebri. It is a sickle-shaped structure lodge the longitudinal cerebral fissure. The attachment of this falx cerebri started anteriorly, attached to the crista galli, then to the wall of the skull, and posteriorly to the internal occipital protuberance. Internal occipital protuberance. Also, it's attached to another part of the dural reflection, which is the tentorium cerebelli. This is the tentorium cerebelli. Tentorium cerebelli even attached to it and forming a tent-like structures. Tent-like structures. The attached border of this falx cerebri here is lodging the superior sagittal sinuses, while the free margin here, free margin of the falx cerebri, containing the inferior sagittal sinuses. The site of the attachment between the falx cerebri and the tentorium cerebelli, containing another sinus called striate sinus. The tentorium cerebelli, here we can see tentorium. This is the tentorium. Between the occipital lobe of the cerebral hemisphere and the cerebellum. The anterior edge of this tentorium containing a gap-like structure called tentorial notch for the passage of the midbrain. The tentorium cerebelli attached to the posterior glenoid processes, the superior border of the petrous part of the temporal bone, and the margin, which is grooved by transverse sinuses. The falx cerebri, and this is the falx cerebri, and below it, falx cerebelli. Falx cerebri and falx cerebelli are attached to the upper and lower border of the tentorium cerebelli. The falx cerebelli here, containing the occipital sinus. Another reflection of the dura, including the diaphragm cilia, which is roof over the pituitary fossa. The pituitary fossa for passage of infundibulum stem of the neurohypophysis. The dural venous sinuses, the vein that drain the brain empty into the venous sinus of dura mater, from which the blood flow ultimately into the internal jugular vein. The function of these sinuses, you see this is the sinus, this is another sinus. The function of this sinus is receiving blood from the brain, and the second function is receive the CSF from subarachnoid space. The superior sagittal sinus, here you can see the superior sagittal sinus. This is the attached part of the falx cerebri. Here, this is the superior sagittal sinus. Lies along the attached border of the falx cerebri, and here we can see the venous lacunae along its attached border. The superior sagittal sinus usually continuous here, continuous with the right transverse sinus. This is the right transverse sinus. The inferior sagittal sinus open into, this is the inferior sagittal sinus, open into the tetraloid sinus. And the striate sinus, or the inferior sagittal sinus, which forming the striate sinus, which is usually at the left transverse sinus, at the internal occipital protuberance, there is a confluence here, a confluence of the sinus, which is located anterior to the internal occipital protuberance. The transverse sinus here, let's see the transverse sinus. This is the transverse sinus. As I mentioned, groove the occipital bone along the attached margin of the tentorium. You can see this is the site of the attachment of the transverse sinus along both sides of the internal occipital protuberance. On reaching the petrous portion of the temporal lobe is continuous here as a sigmoid S-shaped structure called sigmoid sinus. Sigmoid sinus. Another sinus is called the cavernous sinus, which lies on both sides of the body of the sphenoid, which is give a spongy-like structures because it containing many trabeculae inside it. Venous canal around the diaphragma cilia here, and these collectively forming what we call it a circular sinus. The cavernous sinus on both sides of the body of the sphenoid, draining through the superior petrosal sinuses, which run along the superior border of the petrous part of the temporal bone. The superior petrosal sinus, as I mentioned, running along the attached border of the tentorium cerebelli to the petrous part of the temporal bone, and the inferior petrosal sinus also draining the cavernous sinus, which is lies in a groove between the petrous portion of the temporal bone and the basilar portion of the occipital bone. Basilar portion of the occipital bone here to be drained into the internal occipital protuberance. The sphenoparietal sinuses here, this is the site of the sphenoparietal sinus on the lateral wing of the sphenoid bone on both sides. The occipital sinus, as I mentioned here, which is lies in the falx cerebelli. the arachnoid projecting into the venous sinuses to form arachnoid villi, which is the main site for absorption of the CSF into the venous blood circulation. Aggregation of these arachnoid villi forming arachnoid granulation, which form a pit. Here we can see the pits along the attached border of the superior sagittal sinus. We have extradural hemorrhage, and this results from the injury to the middle meningeal arteries or veins. The extradural hemorrhage also can be treated by a bare fall, which is performed above about 5 centimeters or 4 centimeters above the zygomatic arch. Another type of hemorrhage including the subdural hemorrhage, which is resulting from the tear of the superior cerebral veins. The blood accumulated between the dura and arachnoid. The most important hemorrhage is the subarachnoid hemorrhage, which resulting from the rupture aneurysm, or can be also diagnosed by either lumbar puncture or CT scan. Yes. The tentorium cerebelli intervening between the occipital lobe, here, the occipital lobe of the cerebral hemisphere and the cerebellum. Here, the site of occipital bone that containing the cerebellum. The anterior part of the attachment of the tentorium cerebelli, there is a notch called tentorial notch here for the passage of the midbrain. The tentorium cerebelli attached to the posterior glenoid process here. The petrous part of the temporal bone. This is the petrous bone, petrous part of the temporal bone, and the margin or groove here, margins or groove of transverse sinus. The falx cerebri here, part of the falx cerebri, which loading the superior sagittal sinuses here. The falx cerebri and falx cerebelli below is separated by the attachment of the tentorium cerebri. Okay. The falx cerebri, as I mentioned, containing the superior sagittal sinus, and the falx cerebri containing the inferior sagittal sinus. The site of the attachment between the superior sagittal sinus and the inferior tentorium cerebelli is containing another sinus called striate sinus. The cavernous sinus, as you see here, on both sides of the sphenoid body of the sphenoid bone, even spongy-like structures, which is draining either into superior protrusial sinus or the inferior protrusial sinus. Superior protrusial sinus draining to the transverse sinus, while the inferior protrusial sinus directly to the internal jugular vein. Here on both sides of the lesser wing of the sphenoid, there is sphenoparietal sinuses. Sphenoparietal sinus on both sides of the lesser wing of the sphenoid bone. Here we can see along the diaphragmatically there is another sinus called circular sinus.